Dear listeners, welcome all of you who are interested in electroencephalography, EEG, and event-related potentials, ERP, techniques, and all of you who are interested in collecting, annotating, standardizing, storing, processing, sharing, and publishing data from electrical activity of the human brain. Welcome to the third part of our video tutorial that provides you with the next phases of EEG data lifecycle. More specifically, it familiarizes you with the part of the experiment design related to data security and legislation, and the next phase when the experiment design is approved by the ethics committee. For those of you who are beginners, we recommend first listening to the previous parts of our tutorial. In the first part of our tutorial, we introduce the whole EEG data lifecycle that you can see in the picture. It describes the phases through which the EEG or event-related data pass during their life. In this part, we will focus on the part of the experiment design phase and experiment approval phase, marked green in the picture. That is preceded by the phases of experiment planning and experiment prototype creation that were in more detail presented in the second part of our tutorial. This phase, we will try to answer questions such as: why should we secure the data collection process? Why should we keep a lookout for any laws or regulations that dictate how to treat personal information? Why do we need the experiment to be approved by the ethics committee? When we have introduced our current position in the EEG data lifecycle, we can now present an outline of the third part of our tutorial. At first, we will focus on security of data collected during experiments and ethical issues applied to any data processing stage. Then, we will deal with regulations that affect the way we treat personal information included in the data. Later in this part, we will also show a short example on how to refine the collected data to be more secured according to the regulations of the European Union. For example, through the use of anonymization and pseudonymization, and present how security issues are dealt in the Brain-Computer Interface project Basil. This part is as usually concluded with a short quiz. Now, we can move on to the most common problems related to data collection security. In our sense, security is the way we treat and share data without them being corrupted, stolen, misused, or lost in the process. We need to take necessary precautions with respect to possible risks. We can never eliminate all the risks that can occur. Incoming threats can be both internal and external. External threats can be, for example, hackers or viruses that try to steal or damage any data that we have already collected and finally stored or are being processed. As a simple example, during the initial installation of a database, you have a dummy administrator account with all the rights to remove, modify, or add new data. This account is often not suspended or removed when the database is being used for collecting live data. Then, someone from the outside could come and try if such account is present. This could give such a person unlimited access to the data stored in the database. Internal threats are, for example, when people within an organization have access to data they should not have, get inadequate rights, or if they are unaware of their credentials. For example, if a data analyst has, due to prior urgency, rights to delete some data, these rights can be forgotten to be removed. Another typical example is a list of credentials that is put on the monitor not to forget them. In the European Union, there is the General Data Protection Regulation, also known as EU 2016-679 of the European Parliament and of the Council of 27 April 2016, on the protection of natural persons with regard to the processing of personal data and on the free movement of such data, and repealing Directive 95/46/EC. There are higher requirements on protection of special kind of personal data, such as medical data. Let's start with the definition of personal information. Personal information is any piece of information that can either directly or partially serve to identify an individual. Such information can be, for example, name, identification number, localization information, physical or physiological, biometric, color of eyes, fingerprint, genetical, economical, cultural, email, online identifiers such as login, nicknames, religion, and more. In fact, personal information can be anything. There are multiple methods to transform data into a more secure form, so even if someone steals them, he/she cannot misuse them. We will describe some of them in a practical example. The most common ones are anonymization and pseudonymization. The main goal is to manipulate data in such a way that they do not contain any information that could be used to identify an individual. Data can be considered anonymized when it does not allow identification of the individuals to whom it relates, and it is not possible that any individual could be identified from the data by any further processing of the data or by processing it together with other information which is available or likely to be available. Pseudonymization of data means replacing any identifying characteristics of data with a pseudonym. In other words, a value which does not allow the data subject to be directly identified. An example will follow later in this chapter. Because the data can be damaged or lost because of a simple hardware failure, such as hard drive failure, database corruption, it is wise to create backups to an independent data storage. However, the access to these backups has to be secure too. Now we get to a point of concerning ourselves with the ethical issues of data collection. In our experiment design, we might overlook something that we ask for or something that we measure from participants that is not necessary to know and could be considered unethical. For example, certain questions might be uncomfortable to answer or straight up against the ethical codex of most people. So we need someone from the outside of the experiment designing team that can assess whether or not our questions might provoke such uncomfortable situations for the participants. A group of such external experts is called Ethics Committee. The Ethics Committee provides an agreement with experiment design and set of collected, stored and managed data. Read personal and/or medical information, you will need to pay close attention to laws that regulate the ways you can treat personal information. They usually demand a certain higher level of protection that may affect the architecture of your data storage, requires you to modify data in a certain way, for example, through the use of anonymization or pseudonymization. GDPR states how one should read personal and medical information and how any non-compliance with the law is punished. In this case, it's always a fine. As of spring 2018, the fine could be up to 20 million euro or 4% of the annual turnover of the company. Even for the largest companies, this is not something to be taken lightly. For the better or worse, the law is usually largely generalized. For example, the regulation says that the data need to be secured, but it doesn't say how to secure it specifically. The scope of the data security can range from the strength of a password to encryption, and even to the data storage architecture. As of right now, there is no precise guide that would describe all the necessary steps needed to meet every aspect of GDPR. Still, even the most secure architecture is not able to eliminate the most common problem, the human factor. People can write down access passwords on a piece of paper, leave a computer on with a locked account. In such situations, unauthorized personnel can access secure data. It means that security needs to be solved not only on the technical level, but on a personal level as well. During the experiment design phase, we have to create a draft of the informed consent that needs to be signed by all participants in order to conduct the experiment. The overall concept of the experiment is then submitted to the Ethics Committee for validation and comments. When we have a positive response from the Ethics Committee, we can conduct our experiment. After collecting data and metadata from the experiment itself, participants interview and questionnaires of various kinds. The data are stored inside the data store, annotated and prepared for next analysis. Some data have to be removed from the data store when the time period the participant provided us with the informed consent expires, or in the case of the participant asked for data deletion. But all those steps are based on laws that are enforced in the European Union, which means that some of those stated steps might change based on your country laws. It is better to consider electrophysiological and health-related data to be personal information, although it is usually not clear if we can directly or indirectly recognize a specific person from them. That is why we have to be careful when we collect, store, and share these data. Everyone who handles them has to follow legal and ethical code. There are two perspectives on security. The first one is a procedural and organizational perspective, and the second one is a technological perspective. Procedural and organizational perspective include a system of defined roles and their access rights to data and describe the process model that includes all activities from experiment design to data publishing. The technological perspective deals, for example, with data encryption and pseudonymization. These issues and other implementation precautions, including security, will be described later. While we are designing an experiment, we should keep in mind how data are processed in every step. For example, our previous example with the electrophysiological experiment. Current results of discussions related to storing sensitive information lead either to the reduction of personal information that is stored, collected, and managed, or even deletion of data that are not useful or allowed to be stored anymore. Inside the European Union, a measured person can anytime ask for removal of all his/her records, and we need to oblige because it's required by law. In a case of repeated measurement, it is necessary to know the person's identity. The classic approaches rely on the identification based on name, surname, birth date, or other personal information of that kind. There is another option which uses a unique random ID that can be, for example, physically printed as a card owned by the person. An advantage of this approach is that we don't need to directly identify personal information such as the name. However, when this ID is not issued by some central authority, it can probably be lost. The users themselves are the main source of risk. There is a higher chance the data are modified, deleted, or further distributed by the user that has a legitimate access to the system, rather than a hacker which abuses a system vulnerability. That's why there is a need to implement so-called roles, which allow users to perform a limited set of actions, and thus support defined security rules. Under the term role, we understand a set of rules which authorize the user to perform certain sets of actions in the system in the current processing step. Under the term actions, we can understand various settings, ability to view, insert and delete collected data, etc. Any actions can be restricted to certain measurements or a certain type of data. For example, the user is not able to see the date the measurement took place or gender of the participants. System users can be categorized into 4 basic groups. The first group focuses solely on the data collection. This group has only the necessary rights to add new data to the system. During experiments, this group also inserts newly collected data into a data store. The second group analyzes the collected data. This group has the necessary rights to access, analyze, export, and publish collected data. The third group monitors whether or not the experiment design and data collection are in accordance with the established ethical rules. This group includes an ethical committee or journal reviewer. The last and most important group consists of qualified employees, for example, a system operator or data and system administrator, who technically guarantee the data are stored, secured, and used accordingly to established ethical and company rules. There are multiple mechanisms which can help you increase data security. We will describe only some of those mechanisms that we consider good to know. These mechanisms are namely pseudonymization, anonymization, data encryption, data separation, and a security audit. Pseudonymization is a process which replaces the most identifying data and personal information in a data store with pseudonyms or artificially created identifiers. It is necessary in case of storing personal information because it helps to obfuscate the identities of all measured participants. As we mentioned with GDPR, we need to make sure that anyone from the outside of our experiment team should not have access or be able to view those kinds of collected personal information. Pseudonymized data are also suitable for further processing and analysis. Anonymization is similar to pseudonymization, but there are few key differences. Anonymization removes, or you could say cuts out, all identifying data and personal information, which makes it an irreversible process. So let's sum this up. Pseudonymization replaces personal information with something special, so we would be able to recreate the original data if we need to. But anonymization removes all personal information from the data, so no one would be able to recreate the original data. Data encryption protects data from an unauthorized access. We can use either symmetric, asymmetric, or hybrid encryption. Symmetric encryption uses the same key for both encryption and decryption operations. Symmetric encryption is also one of the most used methods. Asymmetric encryption uses two types of keys. One is designated for encryption and one for decryption. In the EU, GDPR indirectly requires you to implement some form of data encryption. Encryption can be implemented on different levels. So for the purpose of this presentation, we divided encryption into three main categories, where each category explains where to start the encryption or decryption process. Let's start with an application level encryption. At the application level, the data are encrypted already when they are entered to some sort of an application form. After the data are already encrypted, then the data will be transferred to the database. On the database level, there is a method called transparent data encryption, also known as TDE, which encrypts and decrypts data inside the database. It means that encryption and decryption is done by the database engine, which is mostly faster than in case of the application level encryption and doesn't require any changes in the original application source code. At the file system level, the data are always kept encrypted, and only when we need to read a certain file, then the file system will decrypt only those required files and encrypt them again when we stop using them. This level of encryption is generally used for backups and the general protection of databases against a physical theft. This way of encrypting data is also called full disk encryption. An additional technique which we can use to increase the overall data security is called data separation. Data separation cuts the original data into separate pieces that are then stored inside multiple databases. For instance, one database could contain only medical data and another one could contain just personal data. And of course, both those databases can run physically on different machines. A last mechanism that we will introduce is security audit. Any software for storing personal data should pass security audit that can discover whether or not the software has any potential security vulnerabilities. Past security audit can increase the overall confidence in our data store security. Now that we have talked about how to secure your database or a data storage device, let's focus on the security of end devices. Under the term end device, we can imagine, for example, PCs, routers, servers, and other electronic devices inside a network. We always process data on electronic devices out of the central data storage. It brings a new problem related to network security and security of electronic devices, which are used for analysis. Here are some recommendations which are good to follow. Connection to the server should be encrypted using HTTPS. This method guarantees a secure data transfer. Secure system is required to have the latest version of updates, configured firewall, antivirus software, and anti-spam filter. Last but not least, it is behavior of a user. It is not a good idea to watch a potentially dangerous content of web pages or run any unknown software. The problem may also originate from any connected external device, since it could contain hazards for the network. Those devices don't need to be necessarily infected by a virus, but still could contain potential exploits which could be used in turn to gain access to certain parts of the network. A good prevention against this problem is to encrypt the disk with sensitive data using appropriate tools for file system level encryption too. For better understanding of how such vulnerabilities could be classified, you can read the PDF file at the provided website trustedintroducer.org. Just remember that security is a jigsaw puzzle. We have introduced multiple pieces which separately help you increase security, but the more pieces you add to the puzzle, the higher will be the overall security. And sadly, absolute security is not achievable. For example, try combining application-level encryptions with data separation and anonymization, add firewalls and antivirus software to your network devices, update your operating system and applications to their latest versions. By combining all those methods, you can create a secure system. Now, after all those mentioned methods, it's time for a short example on how to secure your data through the use of pseudonymization and data separation. Personal data sharing is a process which also requires our attention. Before sharing, personal data have to be anonymized using standard methods. We should keep in mind that not all people agree with sharing their anonymized data. Now, we will try to show you how pseudonymization and data separation can be used. Let us take a quick look at our simple example. In this table, there are some data collected during our hypothetical experiment. The collected data include personal information and medical information. General personal information, according to GDPR, are related to the person and could be used to directly or indirectly identify them. Such personal information can be his, her name, birth date, sex, and email. Generally, this category may also include, for example, age, IP address, phone number, personal photos, or marital status. Storing personal data together with other data is generally not a good idea. Usually, you are unable to identify a person based on their P300 latency and blood sugar level. So, a better way is to split the table into separated tables connected with an artificially created identifier. Let's call it ID in this example. Then we can separate the personal information from other data into different databases, which in turn can be even encrypted to ensure a higher level of security. After all of this, we can create an interconnection of personal information and other data that is hidden and not accessible for unauthorized personnel. This process of hiding the identity behind an artificially created identifiers is called pseudonymization. The ID, our pseudonym, can also be used for person identification in case of any repeated measurement of the same participant. One of the available options is to make a card with a unique ID for each participant, and every time the participant repeatedly undergoes the experiment, it is easy to pair his/her current data with his/her previous data. Finally, we would also like to share or publish our collected data. Due to the enforced laws, we have to consider which data are appropriate to publish and which not. Basically, we won't publish only anonymized data. In this case, the anonymization process means omitting information which leads to a person's identification through direct or indirect means. Our data separation and pseudonymization results may look as follows. The personal data table contains the ID column 1, which links to records in this table to records in the medical data table. The personal data table contains the following attributes: the name of the measured subject, Bruce Davies; the birth date of the measured subject, 22nd of June 1875, and his/her email, davi@mail.com. The second table contains just the medical data that identify the measured subject, so we will call it the medical data table. It has to include the same ID, 1, as in the personal data table, because we have hidden the personal information of this participant under this pseudonym. Medical data table then contains the rest of those attributes, which are the P300 latency, 283 milliseconds, blood sugar level, 5.3, and sex, male. So, if we wanted to share our collected data, we would share only the medical data table, because it contains no information that could be used directly or indirectly to identify a specific participant. The Brain-Computer Interface project Basil was already introduced in the first two parts of our tutorial. Here, we just remind you that the goal of this brain-driven computer assistant system is to provide communication and control pathways to people with severe motor disabilities. In the project, we have followed the security issues that have been applicable and that we have introduced here. The most important security step that has been strictly respected already in the project design phase is to collect a minimum set of metadata from the participant. So, the only very basic set of metadata is collected: sex, year of birth, and laterality. As far as personal data are concerned, such as name, surname, and any kind of contact information, these are collected only from people who plan to change their environment. For example, they moved from hospitals to their homes and want to continue testing the system. However, this personal information is never electronically stored together with the collected EEG and ERP data. Their paper record is logged in the neuroinformatics laboratory. It means that the collected data stored in our EEG base are anonymous from their collection, or pseudo-anonymized in a way that personal information that is linked via an identifier with the electronic record of the participant's collected data is stored only in its paper form in the lab safe. Of course, this solution is possible because the number of such paper records is quite small. The personal metadata are accessible to only one member of the project team. Except these precautions, the experiment design together with the experiment plan has to be approved by ethics committees of all hospitals where the experiments are performed. With the example, the BCI project Basil, we are at the end of this part of our tutorial. Now, it's time for a short quiz. More than one answer can be correct. What is the specific name for a group of external experts that concern themselves with information collection procedure that might be uncomfortable for some of the participants? A. Department of Law. B. Faculty of Arts. C. Ethics Committee. D. Specialized lawyers. The right answer is the Ethics Committee, C, because they concern themselves with the ethics of data collection. What is the acronym for the EU regulation that dictates how personal information can be processed? A. DPGR. B. NGDP. C. RGDP. D. GDPR. The right answer is D, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is also known as GDPR. How do we call a reversible process of data transformation which hides connections in personal and medical information? A. Anonymization. B. Pseudonymization. C. Deletion. D. Addition. The answer is pseudonymization, B. Anonymization is an irreversible process. This fact eliminates the option A. Deletion and addition just remove or add new data, so they don't transform the data into something else. What is the purpose of anonymization? A. A way of modifying the data in such manner that the original participant is not distinguishable from others. B. Removal of any information that can be used to directly identify the participant. C. a reversible process of data transformation. D. Removing the names of the participants from any of collected data. The right answer is A and B. Anonymization is a non-reversible process, so this eliminates the option C. And just removing the names of participants is not solving the problem. It's certainly one of the steps that can be used, but by itself, it's not enough. There could be still additional information in the dataset that could be used to identify the participant. For example, date, place of birth, ethnicity, nationality, religion, and many more. Our quiz is over, and now we can take a short look on our references. And at the same time, we would like to invite you to the fourth part of our tutorial, where we will introduce you the procedure of EEG and ERP data and metadata collection.